151 witnesses, police reports written by all of the involved Fullerton Police Department personnel, medical reports, examination of physical evidence such as batons and tasers, the coroner's report. We also conducted all relevant legal research to determine the applicable law as it applies to this case. After considering all of the law and all of the evidence in this case, I'm charging Officer Manuel Ramos with second-degree murder, one felony count of second-degree murder. And I'm also charging Officer Ramos with one felony count of involuntary manslaughter. If convicted, he faces a maximum sentence of 15 years to life in state prison. Corporal J. Cicinelli is charged with one felony count of involuntary manslaughter and one felony count of the use of excessive force. If convicted, he faces a maximum sentence of 4 years in state prison. The biggest shame about this case is that it didn't have to happen. It could have been avoided. It never should have happened. We're alleging the following facts to support the charges in this case. Ramos set in motion the events that led to the death of Kelly Thomas by committing an act that was dangerous to human life with conscious disregard for that life. His actions were reckless and created a high risk of death or great bodily injury. And any reasonable officer would know that acting the way Ramos did would create such a risk. Cicinelli used excessive force when he assaulted and beat Kelly Thomas, acting recklessly, under color of authority, and without necessity. At about 8:37 p.m. on July 5th, Ramos and Wolf responded to the Fullerton bus depot in separate vehicles. Ramos knew Kelly Thomas from prior contacts as a homeless person who hung out in the area. He did not believe that Kelly Thomas posed him any risk. Kelly Thomas was shirtless, with a backpack, wearing pants with no obvious bulges. The officers did not think Kelly Thomas even needed to be patted down for weapons. During the detention, Officer Wolf stepped 10 to 15 feet away behind his vehicle. He went to the rear of his vehicle to review the contents of the backpack that Kelly Thomas had been wearing when they arrived at the scene, while Ramos gave instructions to Kelly Thomas from 2 feet away from Kelly Thomas. It was obvious that Kelly Thomas had difficulty following Ramos's instructions. His instructions were to sit with his legs outstretched with his hands on his knees. It would be obvious to any reasonable observer that Kelly Thomas had cognitive issues and that he had difficulty following Ramos's instructions. After several minutes of increasingly aggressive instructions, the bus depot video shows Ramos escalating the contact into a physical altercation. It was 16 minutes from the initial contact to the beginning of the physical altercation and the engagement of unlawful police conduct. Ramos made a deliberate showing of putting on latex gloves in front of Kelly Thomas. He approached Kelly Thomas and he stood over him. Ramos repeatedly instructed Kelly Thomas to sit with his hands on his knees and his legs outstretched, and Kelly Thomas had trouble following that instruction. He would move his hands from his knees to behind his back at times, and he would fold his legs up in a sitting position, bending his knees. Ramos stood over Kelly Thomas. With a pair of latex gloves, and he made a demonstration in front while he was standing over Kelly Thomas in a very menacing manner, demonstration of putting on those gloves. When he put the gloves on, And I have to refer to some language here. It's not my language, but it's the language that was used by the officer, so it's necessary for us to refer to it. When he put the gloves on.
All right, you've been listening there to the district attorney. We're just going to drop that for just a moment. We'll get back to it in just a second, but we weren't sure exactly what he was going to say. But there you have it, charging two officers officially, one officer, Manuel Ramos, being charged with two felony counts, second-degree murder, as well as involuntary manslaughter. These are felonies. He could get 15 years to life. This has taken quite some time to get this final charge coming from the district attorney. They spoke with 150 witnesses. They reviewed medical reports. They looked at the batons and the tasers that the officers had with them that evening. They looked at the coroner's report. There was cell phone video and surveillance video from that area. And so this has been a very long process for them. Let's go back to that press conference once again to the DA.
Police investigation, a fairly routine police detention to an impending beating by an angry police officer. By making this declaration of violence against Kelly Thomas, Ramos instilled in that victim fear, a reasonable fear for his life, that he was in danger, and he was in danger by a police officer who wanted to F him up with his fists. Police officers have a right to use reasonable force in the performance of a lawful duty, but citizens have a right to self-defense, even against the police. If the police are using excessive force, if they're not performing a lawful duty. Ramos took this contact from a lawful detention to an unlawful use of excessive force when he lifted his fist and told Kelly Thomas that he was getting ready to F him up. There followed a brief exchange of words as Kelly Thomas remained seated. Ramos then grabbed Kelly Thomas behind his arm, and Thomas pulled away. He stood up, and he started taking steps away from Officer Ramos. Then the baton came out. Kelly Thomas put his hands up, palms out, in a defensive position, palms open. Ramos yelled at Kelly Thomas, "Get on the ground." Officer Wolf, seeing this altercation, came running out from behind his car. The evidence is that he came running out from behind his car to assist with the arrest that Officer Ramos was doing. The evidence does not indicate that Officer Wolf had any knowledge of this exchange that had just taken place between Officer Ramos and Kelly Thomas. The evidence does not indicate that Officer Wolf had any knowledge that Officer Ramos was engaged in unlawful police conduct. The physical altercation began as Officer Ramos swung his baton and chased Kelly Thomas. Ramos punched Kelly Thomas several times in the left ribs after tackling him to the ground. Using his hand to hold Kelly Thomas's neck, partially laying on Kelly Thomas to use his body weight to pin Kelly Thomas to the ground,